Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and I'm continuing to explore how classes play on the Shadowlands beta, now that there's even more class updates every single week. Blizzard has been putting up updates that made certain classes feel better and even in some cases fantastic. Some of these updates have been awesome, whether it is general class changes, but also legendaries to enhance the already existing playstyles. Not every spec though, as a lot of updates are yet to come, as this still is early beta. So this is where Blizzard gets to define some depth, especially in some of the different playstyles that we'll have access to in the next expansion. Legendaries are one thing, abilities are another, conduits and soulbinds can enhance playstyles, but how are certain classes going and how are they doing right now? A certain class and a spec I want to tackle in this video is going to be Priest of the spec Shadow. See where they were at and how they've been improved since Blizzard added a couple updates to them recently. Let's not beat around the bush. Shadow Priest started off a little bit rough at the beginning of Shadowlands, mostly because the spec relies so heavily on external resources and external powers in order to make the spec feel stronger. Like for example, back in Legion they were heavily reliant on the artifact weapon, and losing the weapon going into Battle for Azeroth felt awful. However, Battle for Azeroth quickly replaced certain of these vices for Shadow with Azerite abilities and Azerite traits, as well as essences to further enhance the playstyles, and even certain trinkets fed into the playstyle of what a Shadow Priest can do, with corruptions further fueling that addiction of other outside resources than what the class itself can bring. Blizzard in a sense created a ticking time bomb, because eventually there will be an expansion, next expansion after BFA, when all these things are going to be gone, and then Shadow Priest will feel naked again, without all these other utilities and abilities to kind of cloak itself to make it seem more buff than it truly is. So going to Shadowlands, that started out rough, but Blizzard has added certain abilities to them and certain playstyles, and now we have access to legendaries as well. So we have a more of a full picture of where Shadow Priests at least are starting to look like right now. However, this picture isn't full. Some of the things that are still holding us back from seeing the full picture, like the real big picture, are further updates, but also the gear. The gear in comparison to some of the level 50 characters we can make, a level 50 character with Neolotha mythic rating gear is at about an item level of 130. And the item level that our characters at level 60 start with when we first make them for level 60 is 138. So you are drained of all secondary resources. You start with very bad gear, probably worse than what you will end up after questing through Shadowlands. So trying to get a character up and running full gear to the teeth, head to toe, without functional mythic pluses or functional PvP systems or razor drop actual loot of gear or world quests that do cap at a certain item level, it's super difficult to get a character to the point where you have enough haste, crit, mastery, and versatility to truly see the big picture. You still can understand what the big picture is in a sense, it's kind of just blurry, but you at least see where the spec is heading into. With Shadow Priest, finally we have legendaries and covenant abilities and different combos and synergies for us to test, as well as a couple of different updates that Blizzard has done. Primarily being the Devouring Plague returning back into the game, being an ability that also spends insanity, kind of like how you would spend insanity being in void form, does create for a very weird situation and weird playstyle, which you would think wouldn't synergize well at all with the spec whatsoever. However, playing with Devouring Plague for a while, it actually is a button you want to press, and maybe this is something that Blizzard can do to make this button easier accessible. Maybe give the cost for insanity for this ability be a lot lower, or maybe it is intended to be an ability that you want to prioritize. It was originally added as an ability that you would use as a priest when you didn't want to spend all that time grinding all your resources just so you're able to finally blast the enemy with a massive void eruption and head into void bolts, something to replace it for a shorter gameplay experience. We're just going to want to dot up the enemy and kind of get rid of them as soon as possible. But instead, Devouring Plague actually turned into an ability you want to press. It does quite a bit of damage and it's fun to use. It feels a lot more impactful in some cases than going into full void form and void bolt spamming. And it's something that can be weaved into the void form as well. When you first enter void form, you're full of sanity, and that's enough sanity for you to spend 50% of it off with a Devouring Plague. And then you gain that sanity back pretty quickly through a couple of Mind Blasts as well as Void Bolts and Mind Seers, because at the very start of your void form, you don't actually lose sanity that quickly. So you're able to slot in at least one Devouring Plague before the damage really starts rocking. So in a way, Blizzard added Devouring Plague to be used instead of Void Form, but players found a way to use it with Void Form. And it's actually an ability you might want to prioritize on single target in a maybe specific build. So Devouring Plague is something that people want to press. So that's something for Blizzard to go on forward and maybe adjust in the future. Where I found you wouldn't really want to use Devouring Plague is, let's say, if you don't have a single target that you want to nuke down as quickly as possible. Like an AoE trash bag, you want to put your dots on everybody, build up some resources, and then you really do want to Void Form and Void Eruption to hit a bunch of them in an AoE. However, Devouring Plague does seem to create its own niche in a way. Maybe it's not a niche that was intended, but a lot of players have gravitated towards that specific playstyle. Honestly, it's kind of enjoyable playstyle, and I think it's more enjoyable than just kind of the playstyle that Blizzard has built. Maybe that's something they can kind of take forward into future updates for the expansion so far, particularly with Shadow, and try to find a way to incorporate Devouring Plague as a main mechanic of damage rather than something to be used as a substitute, because a lot of the players in the community have found ways to use it as a main damage component to increase damage, and overall it's an extra button for you to press. It's a favorite for many priests from back in the day too, so it works out pretty well. The second thing are Legendaries, and there's a variety of them, but the two ones that seem to be the most popular for Shadow Priest, one is where you can spawn a tentacle just to channel a little bit more Mind Flay at the enemy. Very similar to the current corruptions, but it's actually originally an ability by Shadow Priest from their artifact weapon, where on Mind Flays they have a chance to spawn a tentacle. I think if Blizzard were to maybe change this ability where it could spawn from Mind Flays and Mind Seers, it would actually be quite useful. But in pure single target, if you're going for a very basic Shadow Priest playstyle. However, there is another legendary that a lot of people have tried out as well, and that's the pet playstyle for Shadow Priest. This playstyle makes your Shadow Fiend or Mindbender, if you talent into it, a much shorter cooldown, and also does quite a bit of extra damage on the side. So you can have a Shadow Fiend that's there with you for every 36-37 seconds, which is an interesting playstyle to say the least. A Shadow Fiend that's up that often means that you can summon your pet a lot more and do a lot more of that pet damage, so kind of like a pet-based class. On top of it, if you were to combine with the Night Fae ability for priests, called the Simp Priest, certain abilities empower your allies as well as yourself. Your Power Word Shield would be used in order to give your allies resources, like mana and energy, and Void Bolt would be used in order to reduce the cooldowns of your party members by a little bit, mostly the main big buttons. For Shadow Priest, there's not a lot of big buttons for them, so Shadow Fiend ends up being the button, and in some cases, if you're going and using enough Void Bolts fast enough, you can actually have at some point 2 Mindbenders out at the same time. That's a lot of extra insanity to generate for you as you Mindbender slaps the enemy around. That's also a lot of DPs to throw out as well, which again feeds well into the playstyle of DP. But so does the Tentacle Legendary, because that also gives you more insanity, so more DPs to throw in. For some reason, I just still can't get over Shadow Priest and your DAs just simply not being the strongest abilities until DP comes in play, and then it feels like your playstyle is complete. You have a very, very strong dot, because I always took a look at Shadow Priest and I thought of them as more like a version of Affliction Warlocks if they were a little bit less agony heavy and more like mind tricks heavy, I guess, in a way. But maybe Blizzard is trying to make Shadow Priest really resemble more towards Boomkins, where Boomy Dots do have certain procs, but they don't really have procs that has to do with your regular base rotation. Where for Shadow Priest, I think that's kind of what Blizzard is trying to do with them. Your dots aren't really there to give you procs or to even be primary source of damage, unless it's like an AoE situation, where your Mind Blast, your Mind Seers, and Void Bolts end up being a good portion of that single target damage output, and the dots are a side thing that is in play whenever it's a pure AoE situation. This is definitely going to be some food for thought for Blizzard, because I don't think a lot of them expected for everyone to start using DP in this way. Again, the original intention was for DP to be used on a short boss fight or a very short add trash bag. Just put DPs on a bunch of enemies instead of having to go into full Void form. Instead, DP ended up being an ability you want to prioritize as a priest. It does quite a bit of decent damage, and there's playstyles that give you all that sanity to be able to spread it to one or multiple enemies. But in a pure single target situation, you actually do want to purchase DP. It's a button that feels natural to press. It's an extra dot for extra bit of damage. It feels like it fits the spec playstyle really well. And the damage you can put out with the builds that people have built is actually competitive. Where Void Form ends up being kind of an afterthought and would be useful in AoE situations because Void Eruption can hit multiple enemies, but mostly you would use Void Form when you already have a DP out, so you can't like get a bunch of DPs to ramp into each other or anything like that. I feel like this is a perfect opportunity for Blizzard to take a look at what people are doing with DP and maybe trying to craft a playstyle that players themselves have been trying to craft. and a playstyle that maybe synergizes into what people would rather play and the buttons they would rather press. So all in all, I feel like Priest is still a work in progress. It's not finished. However, there are some playstyles that are genuinely fun. Yes, it's not the fun that Blizzard was intended for us to play. It's not the playstyle that we're really thinking that we would all gravitate to, but it is on that whole nother scale of enjoyment that I do enjoy. So if you're asking yourself, is Priest feeling that good? I feel like there's still a bit of disconnect between what we as a community think what Priest should be, especially the players that have been playing the spec for a while, and developers. There's still a little bit of disconnect of what we want versus how Blizzard imagines the spec to play. And I don't speak for all Shadow Priests when I say this, but to me personally, I find that there's still fun in the spec. Even though it's not exactly the way the devs imagined that we would use it, there is still a lot of fun in the way that Shadow Priest is and could be for Shadowlands. I'm not talking about viability, I'm not talking about how good they'll be for raiding environment or dungeon environment or PvP. I'm also talking about the general gameplay loop of how we play the spec, known as the Shadow Priest, and some of the different playstyles that you're able to include into the spec. What is going to be the future of Shadow Priest, no one really knows, but from what we've been able to mess around and play around on the beta so far, there's definitely some fun to be had with the spec. Non-conventional, but definitely a very fun spec. Anyway, thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. I took a bit of time to play some Shadow Priest and really analyze it, really try the different builds, try the meta stuff. And I'm usually someone who ends up playing specs that are generally perceived as non-viable, non-meta, and with the shakiness of where Shadow Priest has been so far, playing it a little bit in Battle for Azeroth and then transition into the playstyle and the tribulations that it had in Shadowlands, I'm kind of leaning towards maybe picking up a Shadow Priest as another considered alt going to the next expansion. Call me crazy, but it's something about this weird playstyle of, is it going to be viable? Is it actually going to be good? Will it have to play different weird playstyles in order to be competitive? Something about that actually gets me kind of excited to give Shadow Priest a really solid crack at it. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. What do you think Blizzard can do to make Priest better? Will it be just one of those things that people have said already, like remove Void Form and bring back Shadow Orbs, which honestly could fix it? Making Void Form redundant and making Devouring Plague a much stronger dot would make him maybe a bit more consistent. Of course, with a bit of balancing, because Void Form does increase some of the damage that you do as a priest. But also maybe there's some other aspects from Legion and older expansions that maybe could make Priest also viable and strong. You guys let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see all of you in another video.